All right. So, a couple things I forgot to mention. The Beatles went off the road in the middle of '66. The Stones, and didn't then just never played live again, barring the rooftop show in '69. The Stones actually seemingly were off the road, but actually toured like kind of like did like a Eastern European Iron Curtain tour. And there is fascinating footage of the riots that ensued. Bill Wyman, those are really fascinating sections of Stone Alone as well. Um, it is very interesting though, because they talk about, people talk about Brian being in and out of the band and stuff, or his interest wavering. There's a moment. So this is, by this point, we're sort of knee deep in the Popeye the Sailor era. That's a piece of Stone's lore that Brian would just play Popeye the Sailor when they were doing Satisfaction, which is, kind of speaks. That Keith, interestingly, had a different take on it, which was Brian was just fucking around as a that it wasn't mean spirited towards the song or towards making Keith, which I think Keith, I would agree with Keith on this, that it was more about the fact that they couldn't be heard and it didn't matter what they played, which I tend to agree with. But there is such a weird moment when in '67, that footage, when people are rushing the stage and Brian, it almost seems like he has like some sort of break, kind of like, again, kind of like John at Shea Stadium. There's this sort of weird moment where people are grabbing Mick and the cops are trying to hustle, and Brian just sort of like is just like doubled over, howling with laughter into a camera. And it's such a, I don't know, it's just such a telling moment of like the mania and the craziness of their lives and what these very young people sort of had to deal with. I mean, it wasn't that long after. I mean, it wasn't that long after Elvis. Like, there wasn't really a precedent for any of this stuff. These guys weren't playing. I mean, it's not like now. I mean, they weren't playing big 50,000 seat places that have barriers and video screens, and like, the people were right there, and these were still dance halls for big bands in a lot of cases. It's just interesting to think about. The other thing that sort of predates the full descent into chaos of the Stones in the spring and summer of '67 is Brian made his first trip to Morocco to do recordings of the kind of, I don't even, the root music, so he goes back later in '68, and that's where the Master Musicians of Jujuka record comes from, which I think is an incredible masterpiece and a testament to just how visionary Brian was. And he really was. So in February of 1967, the Stones were back at Olympic, and I think this is the beginning of the outs of Andrew. They have they're working. Started, the first stuff is In Another Land, and an early version of 2,000 Light Years from Home, and apparently a very, very proto early version of You Can't Always Get What You Want. 1967 wound up being a brutal year for the band, a year of drug busts. Mick and Keith actually literally went to jail. It was just a couple of days, but they were in jail. What's interesting is history also always sort of tells the story that, oh, they got vindicated. So the Who recorded a single as a benefit. The Beatles, talked about it in the press. The Stones were very much supported by the other British invasion bands. This is the point where they really, their sort of their reputation as outlaws starts to really happen, and we begin the transition from heathens to outlaws, right? Or exiles, I suppose. Maybe they went from heathens to outlaws to exiles. Maybe that's what it is. But I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think that truly one of the greatest non-musical rock and roll moments of all time is Keith Richards standing in a courtroom in London in 1967, the head, the center of this storm, and the center of, or part of the center of this massive generational shift and massive moral panic, and Keith Richards telling the judge, "We don't care about your petty morals," quote unquote. That is one of the most brutal, like, that's fucking rock and roll. Like, we don't care about your petty morals. That's amazing. Like, that's tough as nails, and that takes a lot of guts. So, but all of that, it all comes with a price. I mean, it's, Lenny Bruce had just died the year before, as people say, from an overdose of police. And Brian, drugs were not good for Brian. And, by this point, Brian, the last couple of years of Brian's life are really tragic. He's institutionalized, he's busted a few times, like, all of it with Brian is bad news. And that stuff really wasn't good for him. And I think that there are certain people, I mean, the 60s are it's sort of littered with this trail of people, from Skip Spence to, and what's interesting is the dynamic shift that it made within the Stones. Brian's sort of role as he got usurped as the band leader was to make himself the sonic avatar, and they now had made 2 glorious albums with his ever-increasing role like that. But Brian really was the leader of the band. It was his band. And as he got usurped, I think that in terms of the British invasion, my sense of it has always kind of been very, very early on, the real geniuses of the British invasion were Eric Burdon, Brian, John Lennon, and then like somebody like Andrew Loog Oldham. Because Andrew was younger than the Stones. I mean, he was 19 when he started as their manager. And I think those guys saw something, however articulated it was or wasn't. I think they were on the crest of something before anyone else was. And, as Brian, the thing is with the Beatles, right around the same time, John was taking himself out of, in the same way that Brian was taking himself out of the running, John was taking himself out of the running in the Beatles. And the difference is Paul was always trying to goad John back into work and support him and support his songs, right? And come up with new projects, So, Paul sort of went from second in command to taking a step up in terms of leading the band. But, Mick and Keith weren't anywhere near as sensitive to Brian. So when Brian took himself out, Mick and Keith just stormed right in there. They were like sharks, And on the one hand, I get it. I mean, the stories about Brian either not showing up or showing up in terrible condition or whatever. I would have gotten exhausted with it too. Especially when you have these guys who are super prolific and writing some of this incredible material. Brian's a strange one. I mean, was he the blues traditionalist, or was he the ultimate avant-garde experimental visionary? He was sort of both at the same time, but in a weird way, that's kind of the same thing with John. Like, John's the rocker of the band, but John's also like the most far-flung, like, avant-garde weirdo of the band. Like, they both it's interesting because Keith once said about John that he was a Rolling Stone in Beatles clothing, but he also said that Brian was the Beatle of the Rolling Stones, which is a weird thing to say about both of those guys, given that they were the leaders of their respective bands, and that they formed their respective bands. So that's a weird yin yang between the two of them. I think ultimately probably the difference between them is that Brian, John, and you see this in other parts of his life, John would get so far out and then sort of snap back to reality. Like, he would kind of sort of wake up one day and say, okay, enough of this shit, I'm clearing house. Lou Reed was similar. Like, Lou Reed would go so far back out and then like, nope, okay, back to work, I gotta focus. Brian, and I think that might be because John and Lou Reed both had the discipline as songwriters. Brian not having that, and as I forget the name of the writer, but once said, like, it's a horrible statement but true, literally couldn't write a song to save his life. And I know that, he wrote, or, Ruby Tuesday would have been his. Like, would that have helped him? I don't know. Would that have saved him? I don't know. What would his leadership role in the Stones continue to have been? Who knows? Because the other thing is, Andrew, and this is where I want to talk about Andrew took himself out. I'm a very big, I know he's a controversial figure in some circles, and like with the Small Faces, like they didn't get paid, and there's, all sorts of stuff. But I've always been a really big fan of Andrew Loog Oldham, in part because I feel like he is somebody who, as the decades went by, like kind of really owned up to his faults and owned up to things, where he screwed up. But also, he has a 2-part autobiography that is, these books are like that, and they're dense. But this guy has so much passion and enthusiasm for music and for the artists that he worked with, and just deep Love. And his descriptions of hearing Phil Spector masters for the first time, or hearing Pet Sounds for the first time, like, I think he is a deep lover of music and art and culture, and the best of it, and helped midwife some unbelievable art. So I'm a fan of the guy, but I think, again, he came into the Stones, he made Mick and Keith the songwriters, and then he between his ambitions of sort of being the Phil Spector of England, in terms of not so much record production, but business and having a label and all of that. I think, like I said, I think he took himself out, and also he was, there were chemical issues there as well. So, I think all of those shifting dynamics, Mick and Keith didn't just sort of replace Brian, but they also replaced, especially in Mick's case, replaced Andrew. And those shifting dynamics, and then, like I said, you have the drug bust, you have all of these different things. And then you have Brian's wandering interests, whether with Andy Warhol or Bob Dylan. It was, the Stones really had a brutal 1967. Not to mention that, Brian was in love with Anita Pallenberg, and Keith sort of snaked Brian's girl. So you also have that happening. So anyway, the Stones kind of stagger through a lot of the summer of love, and the spring of '67. So unlike the focused, prolific, really group-oriented periods of recording with Aftermath and then with Between the Buttons, what winds up becoming Their Satanic Majesties Request is just done in bits and bobs here and there. And there's a lot of loose sessions, and a lot of people coming and going, basically for the next several months, especially, like I said, as the Stones are in and out of court, in and out of legal proceedings. I didn't put this in my Great Rock books because I actually wanted to hold this for this video. But I have no idea if this book is in print, if the Michael Cooper book is in print. But this book really covers, ostensibly it goes up to 73, but it really covers this specific swinging London period of the band. So there's Keith at Redlands. This and the narration, the book is sort of narrated by Keith and Marianne Faithfull primarily, Terry Southern as well. And this is the band making the Satanic Majesties album cover. This is an incredible book, simply just because, and here they are in Morocco, simply just for the insider perspective, and I think it just paints a really, really fascinating picture of what they were at this time, and kind of what swinging London was like, and all of it. It is a phenomenal visual component to the pop Heathens era. So after poking around a lot, spring into summer, they finally do start getting some songs recorded. Andrew is ostensibly still the producer, but not really. They finally start getting some actual songs recorded. So in June they record Dandelion, and then end of July they're back at Olympic, and that's when Bill works with the Small Faces on In Another Land. And that's when the Satanic Majesties album really starts to take shape, and that is also when they record their next single, "We Love You." I don't know that there's a greater or a more striking sort of symbol than, at the same time that the Beatles were doing the All You Need Is Love broadcasting to the world, and hailed, as the ultimate whatever, by this point, they are the pop clergymen, right? And they are the pop politicians. They are all of these things, and they're being written about in these incredibly florid terms. That's when the Stones are filming the video, or the promotional clip for their next single, "We Love You." The Beatles promo clips of 67, Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, and A Day in the Life are all three, I think, masterful experimental short films. The Beatles were making perfect singles, perfect albums, and perfect experimental short films. In a way, they were like a film collective as much as they were a band. I absolutely love that stuff and can watch it all day. Stones, by this point, it's remarkable how quickly they caught up, because "We Love You" is so famously slated by John Lennon as an All You Need Is Love ripoff. The "We Love You" sessions, apparently the song was very, very slow to come together. I have read, is it Nicky Hopkins? I think it's Nicky Hopkins who originated the piano riff. But don't hold me to that. But apparently Mick and Keith just sort of had bits and pieces of music, and none of it was cohering. And according to Andrew Loog Oldham, one night, so Allen Ginsberg is in the studio and doing like a prayer chant with finger cymbals, and John and Paul show up, and according to Andrew Loog Oldham, John and Paul show up, they do the playback, and John and Paul are just sort of listening to these bits and pieces of music, and apparently go, right, well, we'll put that there and that there and that there, and we will sing this over that. And apparently the Stones kind of snapped out of their lethargy and exhaustion and got to work. Apparently the physical presence of John and Paul, like, just put them into sharp focus, and they got down to business of recording hard and fast. John and Paul do incredible harmonizing on "We Love You," so John slated it as a "All You Need Is Love" ripoff. I always thought that was unfair and kind of a cheap shot. I get why he went after the Stones, because Mick did cop a lot of moves, but I don't know that I agree with the "We Love You, All You Need Is Love," and I don't know that I agree with, and we'll get into that, but I don't really agree with Satanic Majesties / Peppers. We'll get to that. But Ginsberg wrote about attending the sessions and talked about how incredible it was to see the Stones and John and Paul, as I believe the way he phrased it was singing together like Botticelli's Graces. I think that's how he phrased it. So just that as a 60s moment, like Ginsberg with finger symbols, like leading orchestrating the Beatles and Stones singing together, as Andrew kind of looks on in amazement, as the band, like, kind of in the same way as they did with "I Want to Be Your Man" those years before, like. but "We Love You," comes out as a single. It is the Stones' kind of big statement, and they're making incredible albums at this point, but the singles are now on a level of artfulness where, again, they really are at whoever you want to say, Beatle, Spectre, Beach Boy, whatever, Who, Kinks, whatever, like the level of artistry is just at this like peak level for kind of everybody, and it really is a high watermark period in the Byrds, and and Hendrix, and on and on and on. You can go on and on, and but I think "We Love You," again, there's the upper sort of top tier of people who were operating with these forms, and that's really where the Stones are. And so how quickly that they, from the time that they started writing songs to focusing on making albums, I always thought Keith's idea about making albums, whereas I believe, as he phrased it, you treat every song like it's a single, and then you've got a great album, which is like perfect and just cuts to the core of the matter. But "We Love You," I think, is an absolutely staggering art statement. So, first of all, the video, the promo film, is as good as what the Beatles were doing. It is based on the trial of Oscar Wilde, and Mick plays Oscar Wilde. Keith plays the judge. The English court, the wig is made out of rolled up tabloid newspaper headlines about the Stones, and Marianne Faithfull, I guess, is the barrister. Marianne Faithfull really got the nasty end of it during the trial. That she was naked on a bearskin rug, apparently masturbating or feigning masturbation with a Mars bar, utterly absurd. So it was very scandalous stuff at the time. So Marianne, God bless her, presents the bearskin rug as evidence, and later on a naked Mick appears from underneath the bearskin rug. It as a pop art statement, as a piece of experimental filmmaking. Peter Whitehead did it. I always thought it was Michael Lindsay Hogg, but it wasn't. It was Peter Whitehead, and it it is an amazing visual analog to the music that they were making, and such an interesting counterpoint to sort of their public reputation. But just that as you have "We Love You" on one end, and then you have the Beatles doing "All You Need Is Love" with Mick with a John Lennon portrait on his back, on the back of the jacket, singing and clapping along. It's very interesting, the contrast of where the two groups were at that point. And as a song, Mick treats it like, first of all, the fact that it begins with the sound of the cell slamming shut, and so just the simple use of sound effects is sophisticated social commentary already, and that amazing itching piano riff that may or may not have originated with Nicky Hopkins, and just what a fabulous, unbelievable groove that they all hit. Really, I think Mick's treating of the lyric, writing like "I'm Free," a very spare, minimal lyric, and letting his very tight editorial word choices speak volumes for him, I think is a brilliant songwriting decision. It gives you lots of space to think, but it is such it is just, to me, "We Love You" is like it really is like one of the ultimate 60s psychedelic records. It's so, I've always been infatuated with it. It is so just overflowing with sounds and harmonies, and then you have that mellotron that's kind of bobbing and weaving in and out of the recording, and Mick, there's the bridge, which is the sort of the angriest and most verbose Mick gets in the whole song, but then it goes into that whole outro section, and that whole outro section, which is basically just a one long gigantic mellotron solo by Brian, I think that's the single greatest thing that Brian ever contributed to the Stones, and I think it's one of the great moments in the 60s. I think it's one of the idea that the whole thing ends with this epic mellotron solo, which is not like something that exists on other people's records. There's not, I mean, even like Good Vibrations, like people talk about the theremin, but the theremin, that's just a musical part that's being played. There's not a big theremin solo that is just basically like the last quarter of the, Brian just takes the entire thing. And to me, that is, people, movies and documentaries and whatever, have overused White Rabbit or Turn, Turn, Turn or something. I think that long extended mellotron solo, that to me, I don't know, if they ever really make the movie or the whatever of the real 60s, to me, Brian's mellotron solo should be like the outro or the credits or something. I don't know. To me, he just sort of puts all of the experiences and manias and just craziness of the times comes out. He's playing the times, and it's a magnificent recording. Because the Stones were operating at, that's another thing about the promo film, is how bad Brian looks during the recording sessions, because there's cutaways from the trial to this. There's brief stuff from the Stones on stage, but a lot of Stones in the studio, and Mick looks super focused, and Bill and Charlie are, Charlie is, I dare say Charlie is laying down drum overdubs for Dandelion, but don't hold me to that, just based on what he's playing but Charlie is deeply immersed in what he's doing. Keith playing organ, he's playing guitar, he looks super focused, like he's on it. The Keith that you see later, a year later in 1+1, it's that guy. Like he's fully in command. Like he's in his, this is where he should be, you know. And Brian looks horrible, and Brian just looks fucked, you know. And the sort of the most the beautiful golden child of the 60s looks utterly damaged in every way. And yet, look at what his contribution to "We Love You" is. I mean, my God, it's a staggering achievement. And then, you know, you get the little fade in of a little burst of the B-side Dandelion at the end. I love it. And so you flip the 45 over, and you get Dandelion, and Dandelion is just such a perfect, weird, imaginative, otherworldly, psychedelic pop song. It is still a pop song, especially driven home by the fact that Mick is basically kind of writing sort of Lewis Carroll kind of nursery rhyme stuff, but it's still sort of the times. It's kind of absurdist and just absurdist, great, sort of semi-nonsensical, you know, I suppose there's social commentary of some sort in there, but it's a magnificent sort of ethereal, floating pop song held together by Charlie's awesome drumming. Charlie really holds the song together and just drives it forward when it needs it. There's that wonderful outro of bizarro music that's a level beyond the breakdowns in Sad Day, where you have Charlie going almost into sort of primitive tribal drumming or something, with Brian, you can barely hear him playing this weirdo sax part. Like, it is, I love, and then floating harmonies. It's John and Paul may or may not be on it. It is, I don't think they are, but I've seen in some places that they are. I love Dandelion, and apparently Keith liked Dandelion so much that was his original name for his son Marlon. So that was original. Apparently, I guess for the first year of his life, Marlon was named Dandelion. Is that right? Something close to that. So anyway, but you know, and then at the end of Dandelion, there's a pause, and you then hear the beginning of "We Love You." So it is a completely circular experience. This is them playing with the form in such a interesting, smart, sophisticated, playful, awesome way. And between that and the promo film, I mean, my God, I mean, they are the pop heathens. This is challenging, exciting, artistic, but also really like fun and creative. And there's just such a great spirit to it. This is magnificent stuff, and it is a magnificent single. So I think now we might as well get into Their Satanic Majesties Request, right? Okay. This is the cassette I would have gotten in the summer of '92. I think that's when I got this. It was either earlier in '92 or I think I got it in the summer of '92. But it was like a joke finding this. Like, I couldn't believe that like they had this at like a record store. Like, because I feel like this was like the only time I ever saw a copy of this album, and it was just too weird. Like, even though its reputation as a bad album preceded it, I was like, I have to get this because what the hell. In the early 2000s, the last car that I had that had a cassette deck, this album kind of went through a renaissance on the cassette deck, and this probably isn't showing up on camera, but the shell, this was in my car so much, and my car was so fucked up and gross and dirty inside. Like the shell got all, I don't think that's showing up, but the shell got all damaged. Like it's really gross and gritty and like sun damaged. Anyway, but this was what I had. There was the big vinyl version of it that they put out a few years ago that I never bought because it was the places that I saw it at were like umpteen bajillion dollars, and it didn't have session outtakes. So what I have mostly listened to is this, which I think they did an amazing job. They got the Hieronymus Bosch stuff. Like I love my little CD reissue of this, and I don't even, are these Bosch paintings or knockoff Bosch? Is it Bosch or faux Bosch? I don't know. Obviously, we have some other kind of period stuff cut into here. I love my little CD package, and just the florid, ridiculous collage stuff. I've always loved the artwork of this record. Even down to the font that they use, like the fact that they use this like weird sort of like old English hymnal font, like all of it, and the fact that they're dressed like psychedelic villagers of the past. Just such an odd. I do think it does in its own weird way connect back to the album. But my favorite thing, and I remember first reading about this in Stone Alone, good year or two before I heard the album, but was Brian's contribution to the artwork. I know I talk a lot about Brian in these, but you know, Brian, that's my guy. So Brian designed his main contribution to the artwork was to create this maze. And the center of the maze says, in goofy, psychedelic hippie font, "It's here." And the joke is there's no way to get to it. So the idea Brian's idea was that these people would be trying to do this maze and would never be able to solve it. I love that. That is like, I talk like in my great rock books about like, the John Densmore writers on the Storm book, like, and how it informed, like it like how it informed so much of my thinking as a young person. This had a massive influence on me, like, and still does. So like over 30 years later, like finding out about Brian's maze that goes to nowhere just as a laugh, like that I don't even know how to describe it. Like most things I've done in my life have probably can be traced back to this. I fucking love this thing. I love this thing as much as I love the music in some ways. So I'm a really big fan of the artwork and packaging of this record. And I never knew. I always thought these were clouds around the edge, because you see my version that I had for so many years in my youth didn't have that. It was cut off. I didn't realize that this was plumes of smoke. I didn't know that. But again, I brought this up earlier. This book, as I already said, shows the making of the album cover, and it's the guys, it's the band. They made, so Charlie, Bill, Mick, Keith, and Brian literally built this album cover. They made it themselves. This is a handmade, if you want to call it DIY, project. I love that. I fucking love that. You know, it's yeah. So like here they are. Like here's Brian spray painting the set that would eventually become the album. Like that's very much my thing. And you know, I think that when you talk about, or when people talk about the Stones, well, not just the Stones, but I think there's that strain of '60s underground stuff that is pointed at as progenitors of punk or pre-punk, and Jim Morrison gets brought up, and or even Bob Dylan recording albums in a day or that sort of thing. This to me is a direct line to that. I think really for me it's about the artists. The through line for me, and I mean the Beatles, the early all of their early solo stuff, like Electronic Sound was, George Harrison's Electronic Sound, or the Plastic Ono Band stuff. Like, I love that all of that was, they either were making the covers themselves or they were working very closely with the people who were doing that. That directly connects to the punk period. And then that connects to the period where I was getting into music, where whether it was Kurt Cobain or Michael Stipe or Perry Farrell, like, they all had a visual sense, and they were all, whether it was the videos or the album covers or single covers or stage sets, like, they were heavily involved in all of that, and I love that. I mean, to me, that's part, in a weird way, like, to me, that's part of being a proper rock band. I mean, that's what a rock band should do in a different context. I always loved David Lee Roth's quote on that when he was comparing his period of Van Halen to Hagar's, where he said, I wanted to be the art project, not just wear the art project. I think Dave has it right, as he does about a lot of things. I'm a big fan of Mr. Roth. So anyway, I have now waffled on about the packaging and everything. So the thing I was going to say is, so a few years ago they put out the big vinyl version of this, and it was beautiful. I mean, I saw it in a few stores. Part of the reason I didn't get it was price, but also, very frustratingly, there were no session outtakes. And again, I don't understand what this weird standoff is between Abco and the Stones about session outtakes. It's a strange one, especially since so much of the stuff is readily available on bootleg, and none more so than this album, because, and I will be getting into this later, there is an 8-disc bootleg called The Satanic Sessions, and The Satanic Sessions inform my ideas about this album as much as the album. A lot of it really reshaped how I thought about the album, what I think the album is, what I think it's trying to say, what I think it does successfully, and what I think it does unsuccessfully. If you're a Stones fan, and if you're a patient Stones fan, go find it out on the interwebs. I think it's worth your time. There's some, the Stones sessions can be a slog. There are a couple bootlegs I used to have from the Some Girls period that I divested myself of, because the Stones' latter practice of just running through songs infinitely becomes exhausting. Like Keith's "we're going to play this for 4 straight hours" thing, I kind of can't handle. But in this period, this was still kind of the next logical progression from how they were making Aftermath and Between the Buttons. So, unlike some Stones session stuff, this is, they're really, really, to use Mark Lynette's word, instructive, and enjoyable listening in their own right. So I'll be pointing out 2 particular moments from that as we get deeper into the album. So ostensibly this is just produced, self-produced, and like I said before, it was recorded in bits over the course over the course of several months. There is especially I feel like in the modern world, there is such a love it, hated it, garbage masterpiece binary around talking about things, whether from movies and basically anything. So this album to me defies all of that. And for ages the knock on it was that it was a BS version of Sgt. Pepper's, that it's a negation of Sgt. Pepper's, that the Stones finally unmasked themselves as being nowhere nearly as talented as the Beatles, on and on and on. And if you're really delusional, that this is the album that convinced, Bob Dylan to start making austere country records. Like, it's so, like, people are so silly. Like, this came out right at the same time as John Wesley Harding. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, people's sense of these things are so, like, weird and goofy. And then you have the fiendish cult that think this album is an absolute masterpiece. For people who are not really Stones fans, sometimes this is the only album that they like. I've come across defenses of this album that fall into that category. Pretty weird. I remember I saw Buzz Osborne. Or did this happen at the show I saw, or did it happen on the internet at a show I just simply watched? I can't remember anymore. Maybe this was something I saw on the internet, but I saw a show on that tour, on Buzz Osborne's acoustic tour, and he referenced the Stones, and somebody like yelled out that they didn't like the Stones, and I remember Buzz was just so incredulous. He was like, "Really? Out of all the albums they made, there's not one song that you like? Really? Nothing? You can't find anything to like?" Just was like, he spent like 5 minutes like just ripping this person. It was pretty funny, and I don't know how you cannot like them. That's very strange to me. Anyway, what is not to like? But anyway, the other thing that I've seen in defenses of this album that I think is really misses the mark is that this, and again Keith's 2000s or 2010s off the cuff comment that we were just taking the piss out of the Beatles. No, I really don't buy that. There are people, again, kind of like with the Soft Parade. And I started seeing this with the Soft Parade in the 90s, and then a few years later I started seeing this with Satanic Majesties. That, no. These are not misbegotten would-be psychedelic epics. No. These are satirical, biting riposts of the hippie trend, a la we're only in it for the money. No, I really have a hard time buying that one, especially with the Soft Parade. Jim throwing in Stronger Than Dirt in the fade out of one song doth not equal we're only in it for the money. Like, we're only in it for the money is such a focused artistic statement, social statement that has such, like, there's clearly so much intentionality behind that album. And it's not just, and that album, of course, is not just a eviscerating the hippies. That album, first, there's an arc to it. That the hippie parody or hippie satire stuff is kind of just one half of that record. There's a lot of other ideas on that album. That's part of it, the density and genius of it. So I have and if you've ever seen the Doors PBS 1969 sessions where they're running through most of the songs on that album, including the title track, and you watch them perform it, and you watch Jim's posture and affect and just his facial expressions and the band as they're playing, especially as they get deeper into the title song. Really? It's a piss take? You really think they're just... Come on. Like, come on. It's an absurd argument. I don't buy that at all. That, oh no, you don't understand the Soft Parade. What they're really doing, it's all under the surface. Kind of like, oh no, The Shining isn't really a horror movie, and it's not about the abuses of the father and the abuses that get passed down from the generations. No. It's about Custer's last stand. Fuck off. Like, oh no, it's about how guilty he was because he faked the moon landings. Fuck off. It's nonsense. The older I get, this horse shit subtext thing, there's room for that to a degree, but come on. Come on. By the way, did you ever see on that, did you ever see the Room 237 documentary, and then the press conference they did for it, where they had Jay Weidner and Leon Vitali at the same panel, and Jay Weidner brings up his like ultimate gotcha argument that NASA purchased this lens for Kubrick and the faking of the moon landings so he could get the whatever, like he could fake it better. And Leon Vitali just is like, oh no, that lens was purchased by Warner Brothers like 3 years later. He just like totally deflates poor Jay Weidner, and Jay like, oh, that's not what I heard. Like he just kind of offers up this like that's not what I heard. Like, oh, it's so great. It's such a wonderful moment. I think the older I get, the longer I live, the more Occam's razor I get about things. So I don't think that applies to this either. I think there's a lot of snark and sarcasm, and there's a lot of, fucking around of various kinds on this album. But the idea that this is, again, akin to what we're only in it for the money, or even what the Monkees did with Head, with like where it's vicious self-satire. I just don't think that's what any of this is. Weirdly enough, to give credit to somebody who I'm not a terribly huge fan of, I think Robert Christgau actually got it right. I think he actually kind of has some insight on this one. On the one Stones Under Review film, he basically sort of says that the Stones are, sure, some of it's a send-up, but it's a send-up in a way that is interested in the hippie culture and the emerging ideas and whatever. It's playing with those ideas, but it's playing with them in an interested way, not in a dismissive way. And he said, yes, there's humor and they're kind of poking fun at things, but as he put out, and I think I already kind of referenced this, the Stones are never fully convinced of anything, which I think is the key underlying linchpin of their psychology from 1962 all the way to the present, or 1963 all the way to the present. I think the only thing that they've ever been convinced of is their love of Jimmy Reed and Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and Robert Johnson, etc. I think that's the only thing, and Otis Redding, I think that's the only thing that they were ever in love with. I think that's the only thing that they've ever been convinced of. I don't think that they're convinced of much outside of Chuck Berry. For good and for bad. There's positive applications of that, and has led to a lot of wonderful things, and then there is a downside to it. So I am not in either the, oh, it's a load of garbage and it's nowhere near as great as whatever. I'm not in that camp, and I'm not in the, oh no man, it's a fucking, it's the best, it's you just don't get it. I'm not in that camp either. I think ultimately what this album is a little bit more prosaic than all of that. I think it tries to do several things at once, some more successfully than others. And I think that where some people can read satire or that this is some sort of under the surface piss take thing is in the sometimes incongruent textures and ideas of the album. That being said, I still think that this is I would definitely not call it a masterpiece. It is flawed, and I think the flaws are obvious when they are there. However, I think that this is still a brilliant, mostly brilliant album that, just like the last two records and just like the big four, just right around the corner, plays as a novel or a film. I think it's still at that standard, and again, I think that it actually sets up some of the experiments on Goat's Head Soup that I really like, and that I think are better than a lot of people think they are. So Goat's Head Soup, funnily enough, to me has a lot of echoes of this. And it's interesting because in 1973 there are a lot of 67 echoes. Like, there's certain things on Mind Games, and like even Band on the Run, which was recorded in 73. Like, there's a weird sort of, I know that that's always written about, like, American Graffiti and stuff as the year of 50s nostalgia, but weirdly there's also like a 1967 nostalgia on from records of that time. And I feel like the ghost of this record, like, is in the background of Goat's Head Soup a lot of the time. It's one of my half thought out theories that I'm pretty convinced of. So anyway, boy, have I waffled on for a long goddamn time. My goodness, let's talk about some fucking music, shall we? So this album begins with Sing This All Together, and I think the thing that's really weird about this record, or one of the things that's jarring about this record, is just how amateurish it sounds, and how it is a very muddy record. I don't know if the vinyl version cleaned it up, but I feel that the mud is actually very well captured on this in a, like, it accurately portrays the mud, because boy, the horns, like the opening figure, that sort of doomed opening figure, and then that bleat from the horns, that sort of defeated, it's so, like, it's already dark and wrong, like, immediately. I think what this record is ultimately is, I think it's the Stones' exhaustion. I think this is what they sound like after, they stood up to the man, but what did it take away from them, and what did it take away from their energy and their essence? The song is Mick sort of unconvincingly kind of being the psychedelic ringleader. It's not really a role that he was born to play. He sings it perfectly fine. The lyrics are perfectly fine. I think one of the pieces of incongruity is when the horns answer him, do a sort of a back and forth before leading up to the chorus, that it's because this thing is so wan and listless and amateurish sounding, and the tightness and brightness of the horns coming in sounding like it fucking was flown in from a Tom Jones or an Association record, is really that much more jarring and weird. It's it's an odd one, and it's so loose. There's a song there, but it's like in its most distended, deconstructed state. And you really do get the sense of these guys, that this was recorded at like 2 a.m. as they're all half asleep and on whatever. And I think that if it was a stronger song, it would be that much. It would be that much more commanding. But it's too exhausted to really fully commit to anything. So it winds up being some of this and some of that, and you can kind of get into the dark vibe of it, but then it's like not dark enough. Like, so it's an odd opening. It's an unconvincing opening, and I feel like this song doesn't do the album a ton of favors in terms of setting it up. Yes, there's lots of things that I like about it. And so Brian, by the way, is doing percussion and playing flute. I do like the sort of some of the looser parts, I do enjoy and can appreciate that. But it doesn't amount to that much as an opener. And I think that just this also having a reprise and kind of being the most lyrically kind of its time song. I think if this hadn't been the opening, a lot of the Sgt. Pepper stuff would have been relegated just to some of the quasi similarities of the cover. As even the similarities of the cover, I mean, even I've never even fully bought that. Yes, there are pictures of the Beatles in there, but like, look at them. It's like, this is like some weird, wrong, like, Canterbury Tales or Brothers Grimm. Like, this is, the Beatles on the cover of Sgt. Pepper are the ministers of pop art. They are the pop politicians, the high priests of the, and the beautiful pop art display, what would it be? Tableau behind them. It's such a, even the album is such a grand statement. This is just them alone with a handmade set doing some weird Canterbury Tales, Brothers Grimm spooky story thing. This isn't Pepper. This is, I don't know what this is. This is its own, to me, this is very much its own thing. And again, instead of a tableau of icons of the new era, it's Hieronymus Bosch, clippings from like, stuff that would have been in like the free newspapers of the time, and then Brian's maze that leads to nowhere. You know what I mean? So that's the first song. Then we get, the album peaks very early. We get into Citadel, which is one of my all-time favorite Stones songs and one of my all-time favorite songs by anyone. Let's see if I can be slick and find it. I doubt. Here. Now this is slick. On this album, Red Cross's epical Teen Babes from Monsanto, one of the greatest fucking albums of the 1980s, one of the most perfect rock and roll albums ever made. This thing is a goddamn masterpiece. They do an absolutely ripping version of Citadel on this that nearly matches the original. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention the glorious Red Cross cover. Unbelievable. They will have a video someday, because that band is fucking amazing. At their best. They're one of the best. But Citadel, classic, brilliant Keith Richards riff, the mud, the psychedelic mud, the fact that there are so many layered sounds, but that it's still really weird and dirty and muddy and wrong sounding, it is that much more powerful. It is an incredible song, and all the weird, so I'm assuming, so Brian plays mellotron, sax, and flute on this. So that on the sax, like, that's Brian. I don't hear flute parts. but the mellotron, the bing thing that happens in the chorus, so like that, that's like one of my favorite moments ever, and just it is so of the earth, and also very ethereal. And Mick's lyrics, these are some of his very best lyrics. Like, Mick on this album, weirdly, really branches out even further as a lyricist. The lyrics on this song are these sort of impressionistic, it's his reflections on the trial and on prison, and then just kind of the modern world and alienation in the modern world. I stole one of the rhymes for something I wrote once from this. The years driving around with this, hitting rewind, like it's an absolutely incredible song and an absolutely incredible recording. It so captures its mood, a unique, specific mood that, again, this has nothing to do with Sgt. Pepper. It has nothing to do with Traffic. It has nothing to do with Cream. It has nothing to do with Jimi Hendrix. Like, this is its own weird, dark thing, and it is absolutely incredible. And I have to say, really, the mellotron, there's the bing, but the floating ethereal mellotron uplifting parts, like, so the contrast of what Brian is doing and then what Keith is doing, like, grounding this whole thing, unbelievable. One of the best, truly one of the best things they ever did. And then we get to a song that I truly can't stand. And that's In Another Land. Yeah, the Small Faces are on this, right? And I love the Small Faces. I am a very, very big fan. They will eventually get their own video someday. Love them. I haven't figured out how I want to cover the early era of the Small Faces. That's the problem. Because the body of work is small enough, I feel like I should do the whole thing, but, like, yeah. And talk about a messy US to UK discography. Oy vey. Anyway, In Another Land is Bill Wyman's songwriting debut for the Rolling Stones. This is easily the worst song on any Stones album up to this point, and maybe the worst song until some of the 70s, middle to late 70s stuff. I don't know. This is just... yeah. You have to assume it's a piss take. I know that there are defenders of this song and people for whom who think that this is a "we're only in it for the money"-esque piss take send up. This is kind of like, this is a piece of evidence 1A. I don't know. I just think the song doesn't know what it really wants to be or what it's even saying. I've never liked it. I don't like Bill's singing voice on it. Chorus is okay, but I don't think it's a send-up. I think overall, is I think the sentiment of the song, I don't, I think the send-up of the song is sort of sincere. I don't like this at all. It's just goofy and not in a compelling way. Like I said, the chorus is nice, and the parts where they're all harmonizing together in the chorus sounds lovely. But yeah, I don't like the verses. Along with the Soft Parade, this song, In Another Land, is such a low point for me. And to go from Citadel to this, hey, there's a song on the Soft Parade that Robbie Krieger sings the chorus of, Runnin' Blue, that is overwhelmingly my least favorite moment ever from anything that the Doors recorded. Like my brain turns off. I can't even analyze why I don't like it, other than I can't stand it. This is kind of one of those. So, and I've tried. I mean, I've had this thing for over 30 years. It's not like I haven't listened to it, and it's not like I haven't tried to give it a fair shake. And it's not like I don't like Bill. I love Bill. I love all of them. But no. And I love the Small Faces. But no. This is just, I don't know. It's slapdash in a way that I find hard to, I find it hard to even think about it. And then it ends with the clip of Bill snoring, which I think kind of says it all. Did you know that the snoring was the last thing recorded for the album? Fun fact. So anyway, so then we go from the sublime to the ridiculous, back to the sublime. We go to a fairly straightforwardly recorded song. Who plays organ on this? Or do we know? Okay, Nicky Hopkins plays organ on this. That explains a lot. 2000 Man, a subject matter that Ray Davies would later do for Plastic Man a couple of years later. I don't know if he was influenced by this, but Ray Davies kind of plays that more for laughs. Mick, while there's humor in this is actually a really interesting, intelligent, funny, but smart and, interesting, creative, intelligent piece of future, sci-fi, future dystopia sci-fi. I love everything about it, but it's interesting because what I had talked about with Between the Buttons, where you could hear Keith's emerging loose jam style songwriting emerging that like you can see in the 1+1 movie. Like, I feel like that's another one of these. Like, I feel like that acoustic figure, that just feels like, he was playing that in the studio and they just simply built it from there. So Brian is not on this one. And like I said, Nicky Hopkins plays the absolutely beautiful, evocative organ parts, and really plays as one with the rest of the band. When the Stones lock on to coherent ideas on this record, they sound fantastic. And I think the lack of psychedelic effects or superfluous production really just lets the song be what it is. And the way that this album is recorded, the way that it's so slack, it already has its own vibe, and it doesn't need a lot of other stuff. It's already weird and dark and loose. And this song just, the song and the recording is, to be fully formed, and it doesn't need a grander production. And it is a lot, to me, it's actually more genuinely psychedelic to just sort of have this vibe of them just kind of sitting, recording in a circle, playing off of each other. So that is 2000 Man. And then we get the reprise of Sing This All Together. Uh-oh. Here she is again. See What Happens. And Brian, again, mellotron and flute. John and Paul are supposedly singing on this. This is, of the loose jams on this record, and there's a couple more, there's more on side 2 of that. This is, to me, the least successful. It's 8.5 minutes. I don't know that it needed to be. And it is just kind of like an alternate take of the opening. I don't know. Parts of it I kind of like. I can get into it, and in some ways I can get into it easier than it being a more fleshed out song, and certainly as an album opener, I can appreciate it a little bit more for what it is. But again, the loose jamminess and the sort of almost amateurishness of it, it's funny to hear. And I might as well say now, the Satanic Sessions, for as much as the Stones back, especially Keith, backpedaled off this album, Mick has always said that he likes it. What's interesting is because Brian isn't always there, and Brian was mostly playing overdubs, and there are people who have posited that this was like Brian's album. Not really. What the Satanic Sessions, what the 8 discs of that epic bootleg reveal, is that this is Keith's album. This is Keith's record. Keith's the one starting all these songs. He's the one jamming all of these things, and he's the one kind of leading the jams. So when you hear just the raw tracks and the unedited takes, it's Keith doing the count-ins. It's a lot of this are his ideas, and then Brian or other people putting stuff over it, or Mick sort of fashioning it more into songs. So it's interesting. Anyway, sing this all together, see what happens, sort of grinds to a halt. I mean, it doesn't really go anywhere. It's totally open-ended. I wish it did cohere more into something, but what it sort of de-evolves down to is I guess it's considered a track, what was originally the original name of the album, Cosmic Christmas, which is basically Bill. Now this is a Bill experiment I can get behind, a weird, ultra slowed down version of We Wish You a Merry Christmas that basically sounds like a malfunctioning robot saying, "We hate you." That is magnificent. I love it. It's weird, it's fucked, it's dark, like it's sarcastic, it fits with it's the sonic equivalent of the maze. It fits in with all of this, and just the idea of turning We Wish You a Merry Christmas inside out in such a manner. Love that. And I wish there was a little bit more of that in both with In Another Land and Sing This All Together, See What Happens. Like I said, I like weird avant music. I like aimless stuff. I can get behind all sorts of things. I'm the guy who vehemently defended Revelation by Love. But this isn't that, you know what I mean? Like, Revelation by Love, to me, has a point and builds to something. These are people who are exhausted and, and they are outcasts who have been, they're damaged. They've been outcasts all their lives, but they haven't figured out how to turn that yet into a song. So, at any rate, the album, if not for the snippet of Cosmic Christmas, which is funny that it's its own track because it's not, it's not listed on the album, brings us kind of to the end of side 1. An album that has so far had highs and lows. But what will happen on side 2? We have to find out when we flip the record over. We come to side 2 of Satanic Majesties Request. Now, side 1, of course, in my opinion, a bit uneven. Some of it wan, some of it listless, a little directionless, perhaps. Side 2, however, in my opinion, spoiler, is unusually backloaded. And I think if you are going to make the case for this as a great album, perhaps maybe a misbegotten or misunderstood masterpiece, side 2 is where you are going to make your strongest arguments. Also, the true pathway towards what winds up happening on Beggar's Banquet, again, what you kind of start noticing on Aftermath, where starts to flower on Between the Buttons. This is another very important stage of the development of Keith's writing style and kind of just being de facto co-producer of I mean, not to take away from Jimmy Miller, but Keith being the captain of the ship starts to really deepen, and and as simultaneously over the last couple records, but then sort of maxing out here, Brian as the sonic avatar. So those two trajectories go to greater extremes here. If Brian hadn't had the 1968 that he did, it would have been interesting to see what he did on, or more of what he could have brought to Beggar's Banquet. But I feel like this is the album where it's considered that Brian is checked out. You either have people saying Brian's checked out or it's his album, one or the other. I think the checking out really happens on Beggar's Banquet. Keith just fills all of that space incredibly, brilliantly, because he's Keith Richards and he's one of the great figures of rock and roll, right? I mean, duh, It's like saying it's cold in the winter. Side one opens up with something that I really like, some found sounds, some random street sounds. I wish actually that they had done more of this. I wish that had been kind of one of the linchpins of the album. I think that combined with Cosmic Christmas weaving through, I think would have tied together side one a little bit better. Some of the jarring extremes of it. I love it. I always I kind of wonder if the Animals took that idea and ran with it on the Every One of Us album, which I'm a very big fan of, actually. But I always wondered if Prince was aware of this album and incorporated some of that, some of those quick little clips of found sounds before. Is it before If I Was Your Girlfriend? Anyway, and then I think there's some of it on the back half of that record. I'm forgetting right now. Anyway, but then it goes into She's a Rainbow, recorded earlier in the sessions. I think you can kind of tell what was recorded earlier as opposed to later on this album, because the band just gets more ground down as it goes on. Anyway, She's a Rainbow is an absolutely transcendently beautiful psychedelic pop song. I mean, it's a kind of a psychedelic pop masterpiece. It's so buoyant and joyful. The piano figure, some of Nicky Hopkins' greatest work ever. Pre-Led Zeppelin, John Paul Jones does the string arrangement. Mick's lyrics, I would have to imagine it's a celebration of Marianne Faithfull. How could it not be? And how could you not celebrate Marianne Faithfull? I mean, she's Marianne Faithfull. And it's just an amazing psychedelic love song. And just a portrayal of beauty, portrayal of nature. It's glorious. Absolutely glorious. Mick's lyrics are incredible. Still running the ink when he was able to focus during an enormously difficult year. And the breakdown sections are really, really cool. I love all that stuff. I love all the interruptive devices that they were using. I think that, they might have gotten it from the Beatles or wherever, but I think they use it really well. I think it's to great effect. I think it enhances the song. There's a great sense of humor to it, but again, a sense of joyful, gleeful experimentation. So much of this album is so dark and so weird and out of it that the album needs a buoyant pop song, and I think it works really, really, really well as a side opener. It was released on its own as a single. I first would have heard it on this. Just an absolutely beautifully soaring song. Like, I've always loved it. And also, I just weirdly, at the very end, I love Keith's guitar sound at the very end. Kind of like at the very end of Have You Seen Your Mother Baby Standing in the Shadow? Keith all of a sudden would like amp up his guitar tone at the end of these things, and they always sound really, really cool. It's sort of almost like proto garage rock, proto metal ish, like, and kind of what he'd be doing. It prefigures what he'd be doing soon enough. So that is, that is a glorious way to begin side 2 of an album, and then it goes into the Lantern. The Lantern, Brian is on the organ, so the organ intro, and Keith's guitars are, he's doing all the guitars on this. It's very blues based in a way that the rest of the album kind of isn't. However, oh my God, does it create a mood. It creates a mood that is hyper evocative. And though I want to say it was recorded before this, because I think this is from 68, I want to say. It is, to my mind, it has always been the soundtrack to Fellini's section of this. If you've ever seen Spirits of the Dead, Terrence Stamp plays an actor named Toby Dammit, and who I've always felt is like a weird amalgamation of Mick, Keith, and Brian into one person. It is a, like, this is a horror anthology. Fellini's part of this is, at times, depending on my mood, my absolute single favorite thing Fellini ever did. But the parts of Toby driving at night, like, I feel could be scored by the Lantern. It is, they take blues, in the way that the big 4 albums take blues, the blues form into all these amazing different directions, whether it's jigsaw puzzle or, I mean, you could say even Sympathy for the Devil, and Midnight Rambler, etc., etc. Even You Can't Always Get What You Want in a weird way. This is almost kind of the first of those, I guess. And it is singular, I think, in terms of what it achieves. Mixed lyrics. I've read analyses of the lyrics that make sense, and that it implies more of a narrative. I purely take the lyrics as imagistic descriptions of this mood. It is it's not even that it's dark. It's just like totally black and like minimalist and surreal, and it's very hard for me to sort of, like, I have a movie in my mind when I listen to this song. This is truly like late. This isn't even midnight. This is like 3 a.m. music. I mean, this is when you have been up, or this is when you are refusing to sleep music. Yeah, this is music like for when you're on the other side. And, mix lyrics and singing are absolutely perfect for this thing. That's got to be Nicky on, yeah. So Nicky Hopkins on piano, because that's what's so interesting, because it is a blues in a lot of ways, and like Nicky going into the, I guess going into the choruses, plays these sort of penny ante rolls on the piano. Like, there's a lot of traditional elements, but it's played, the tempo is so slow that really Charlie's not even playing a beat. Charlie's sort of playing percussion parts. And also, Charlie's intelligence to do that. Like, some drummers might have sort of forced it into putting more of a steady backbeat to it. But really my favorite part are there's two recurring sections of where they're just sort of playing the chord sequence, and the second time they bring in brass over it. So the dun dun da da da, these like very quiet, like fucking misty hills at midnight, like, glorious. Like that to me, like when they bring the brass in, when they repeat that part, and just the slow, subtle, quiet tension and atmosphere that they're building, or not that they're building, that they're creating and sustaining. That to me is as sophisticated sound painting as any of the stuff like, A Day in the Life, or any of the stuff on Piper at the Gates of Dawn, or anything on like Strange Days, or like that. That is, it's one of my like favorite passages of music ever. Like, and as much as I love the song, I will listen to the song just for those parts sometimes. Absolutely magnificent song, and one of the most underrated Rolling Stones songs ever. So, and this is now up a level. I mean, this is another level of development for them as songwriters, performers, recording artists. Andrew's not really around, so this is their. I mean, this is another big development past Between the Buttons, and on the way to the Big Four, and the fact that they were able to do this kind of sound painting pre Jimmy Miller, and when they were supposedly at their worst. Yeah, and this doesn't have anything to do with. I mean, this doesn't have anything to do with, the fucking hippies or hippie culture or doing a piss take or anything. I mean, this isn't that. This is deep, dark, gorgeous, beautiful music that is fully the product of their muse, or their collective muse. So magnificent. And so I feel like the Stones are like really flexing their muscles at this point, as album makers, especially after such a dynamic side opener. So then we go into the song that I think most people probably hate, and is probably used as to sort of batter this album around, and that's the epic Gomper. First of all, it's called Gomper, so I think people can kind of use the kind of sort of nothing title as to imply that it's nothing music. Whereas the jamming on Sing This All Together, See What Happens, to me feels listless, slightly amateurish. Gomper, I think, is an absolute psychedelic masterpiece. It's one of my favorite things they ever did. This, to me, especially coming off of something as minimal and weird and slow as The Lantern, but The Lantern is still has formalist elements to it. This barely has anything. It's again, mix impressionistic these are absolutely gorgeous kind of Blakean lyrics, like weird floating, beautiful psychedelic, genuinely psychedelic lyrics. This is, to me, right up there with the Inner Lights lyrics, or what Lennon was writing at this time, or what Syd Barrett was writing at this time. Like, this is gorgeous. There's that specific weird English pastoral psychedelic thing that the Americans tended not to have, where the British didn't just go back to music hall, didn't just go back to the Victorian era, but they went back to some sort of medieval literature traditions. Not medieval. Well, yeah, I guess so. It's they somehow reconfigure their own cultural heritage using some of the best elements of it. It's it's absolutely it's absolutely beautiful. I love Gomper, and I love Brian's like bonkers interruptive recorder solo. Like that's the like separating the men from the boys moment, because I feel like that moment when he comes in with the like that's the probably to my mind the part where if somebody who is resistant to this album has made it that far, that's where they turn it off. That's their cutoff point. That's where they say, oh, this is just a bunch of psychedelic bullshit. What were they doing? I want rock music. Fuck all that. This is gorgeous. This is gorgeous, and it goes somewhere. It doesn't necessarily lead to anything specific, but it has its own weird open-ended form, and I absolutely love Gomper. So I will say it here. What I have done I years ago, just like I did with Aftermath, I made my own version of this album, and I took off in another land, and I took off something else, and I don't remember what now, but I put on, I might, you know what I did, because I'm very anal retentive with these things. I might have kept She's a Rainbow as a standalone single, so I would have kept it off the album because I'm built that way. So there's a really cool instrumental, just a cool like 60s loose psychedelic instrumental. Could have been in a movie soundtrack. Could have been like on the soundtrack of the Blow Up. Called Gold Painted Nails. So I put that on this album, and then in the same way, now most people would think I'm absolutely crazy for doing this, but in the same way that they sing this all together and then the reprise, I use an alternate take of Gomper that's even more like bonkers and even looser and weirder than the thing that's on the album. I don't even remember if it has vocals or not, but I have a Gomper reprise because that's how much I love Gomper. And then it goes into 2000 Light Years. I mean, how perfect is the setup? So from the outro of She's a Rainbow into the strange phantasmagoria of the lantern, and it truly is, into Gomper, the end of Gomper perfectly sets up the next song, 2000 Light Years. The song that I think pretty much everybody agrees on is this, and She's a Rainbow tend to be the two songs that kind of most rock fans or whatever agree on are great songs. This is an absolute masterpiece. To me, this 2000 Light Years from Home does more successfully than what Pink Floyd tried to do throughout Saucerful of Secrets. There's a lot on that record I like. I'm a particular fan of Jug Band Blues. But this is that album, except that they nailed it in one song. Mix lyrics, how imaginative to go from, just as lyrics, to go from She's a Rainbow to, and also like 2000 Man and Citadel already on side one, but to go into the Lantern, and then the minimal but beautiful evocative lyrics of Gomper, and then this. I mean, this is outstanding writing. It's an outstanding piece of arrangement. Brian's mellotron, like interweaving mellotron parts, the weird ethereal seesaw mellotron parts, like this is like some of, I think, his absolute best work. It's some of his absolute best sound painting. The oscillator solo, for lack of a better way of putting it, that he takes is amazing and awesome, and especially counteracted with, again, like Keith's like hard right hand rhythm parts, like gorgeous, like, and again, just as such, like the dynamics and the control, the part after the breakdown when Charlie leads them back in, that bop 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 is like one of my absolute favorite drum fills in the entire fucking history of rock and roll. Like that, like you wait and listen to that part, like all like the ebb and flow and balance of it. It is absolutely perfect. They completely nail it. They like again, and this doesn't have to have anything to do with basically any other band. And this is them following their muse, and basically every song so far to me on this side is them just at their highest level. And so that to me is that to me is and then the timpani, like, good God, like the timpani parts, like absolutely incredible, like amazing. And then that kind of leads into the sort of, we're kind of back to side one, and it again is a little muddier sounding like side one, and that's On With The Show. It feels a little bit like a throwaway. It's kind of light social commentary from Mick. Maybe it's sort of bringing us back to earth, bringing us back to the straight, like a skewed version of the straight world. You're back on, you're back on, in the middle of London during lunch hour in the middle of the week. I don't know. It's kind of a odd ending. It's kind of the opposite of Something Happened to Me Yesterday, which to me kind of raises the level of sophistication, and there are a lot of elements happening simultaneously on that song. It's not that I dislike the song. I just feel like it feels a little bit of an afterthought and a little bit kind of a ending after the very, very, very great heights of what they achieve on side two. And side two, it's a lot of different moods, as I said, but they all work together, and it almost feels sweet-like. It almost feels like one larger piece of music. So On With The Show kind of maybe works in that context, but on its own as a song, and I don't know. Yeah, as an album closer, I don't know. I've always been I've always been not super excited by it, and I do wish the album. If the album had ended with 2,000 Light Years, now that really feels like a statement, So that was it. The album came out in December of '67. It had been a rough year. The Stones did not get great reviews. I don't think the album sold particularly well by Rolling Stone standards, and they had to kind of reassess what they were doing and figure themselves out as a band going forward. But I feel like they still very much had retained their position as the pop Heathens, certainly. So I guess the album has masterful moments. There's some truly incredible music on here. I kind of like my version a little better, honestly, because I just go with more of that loose, dark, psychedelic band playing in the room thing that you get on some of the Satanic Sessions material, which but it's still it's still an incredible album, and there's a hell of a lot to love about it. And is it a masterpiece? No, but it is not in any way substandard or lousy or anything like that. And when it works unbelievably well. So put this on with the sound off, you know, play this, you know, or play this on repeat with what's his face, Pasolini's Canterbury Tales with the sound off. And you can have a good night. You can have an enjoyable night, or make a playlist of this and their, you know, We Love You and Dandelion, and play that stuff. Play those films with the sound off, and I think that could be that could be a fun evening. So anyway. Good Lord, I have no idea how long this goddamn video is going to be. I can't believe the last one was as long as it was. We have picked up a few more subscribers. That's awesome. So welcome. Thank you for subscribing. And, you know, maybe we'll pick up a few more. We're marching towards 100 is optimistic. Let's get to 75. How about that? Tell your friends if, you know, I don't really have that many, so I'm not able to tell mine, but maybe you can tell yours. So anyway, on that note, I have a pretty good idea of what the next video will be, but I also change my mind a lot about these things, so so we'll see. But so I don't want to give anything away, but we shall be back soon enough. Like and comment and subscribe and share and all that, and let's spike the algorithm, you know, and yeah. So thank you for watching. I greatly appreciate it. You know, I try to be succinct, but I'm just unable to be. So at any rate, I will be back next time with a hopefully very, 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 very exciting and interesting and dynamic video. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and bye!